On my hand here is the Hasselblad 907X together with the CFV50C2 and the 35-75 lens. Today is supposed to be a review of this camera, but this is the 5th take. There's 4 takes before it. And after doing all these takes and revising my script a few times, I think the right way to review this camera is slightly different. And in fact, today's review will be very different from my traditional ones where I review my other cameras in front of me. Let's talk about this Hasselblad now. I'm Richard, welcome to Zackley Productions. I'm a portrait photographer, and today I'll talk about the Hasselblad 907X together with the CFV50C2 and then the lens in front, the 35-75 lens. Today, I will look at this as the entire system. I won't review any particular part of this. I won't review the body only and the lens only because I think this whole thing should be reviewed as a system itself to really let you guys see what's the difference between a Hasselblad system and all the other cameras out there. Now, the unique part of this system is that there is a body. Let me show you. A body and a lens. And then you notice that this part in front, because this is the sensor and the body itself. Why do Hasselblad do this is that traditionally, most medium formats can actually change their backs to various types of film systems or Polaroids and stuff. So this back itself can be actually mounted on a traditional 500 series Hasselblad body. If you don't know what it looks like, let me show you this photo here. That is how a traditional 500 series body of a Hasselblad looks like. And you can take this digital back and put it on it and make that 500 series body digital. But that said, today we'll review about this setup here. Now, I will first clear away the biggest thing about this setup is that it's expensive. This setup here costs $19,000 on my hand here. And as such, I'll thank Slash Distribution for loaning me this copy because 19K is not cheap in any way. By the way, 19K Sing dollars. In the States, I think this setup is about, 12,000 USD. 19K is definitely not cheap in any way. Neither is 12,000 USD cheap in any way. And just to compare, this GFX system in Singapore pricing will cost only about 17,000 Sing dollars. So this guy is a full 2,000 Sing dollars more. In the US, it's 10,000 plus, I think 1,500, 11,500, right? So 19K, and this is a 50 megapixel system. So after like 4 earlier recordings, I find that this camera cannot be reviewed by traditional means because technical spec-wise, it ain't gonna beat like the A1 in front of me. And at most, it is on par with the GFX 50 in terms of technical specs. In terms of responsiveness, I would say it's the same as the GFX 50S2. In fact, let me show you guys what I mean by responsiveness. The camera is really fast. It boots up relatively good. When things come out, you just press play. It plays fast. It swipes fast. In the field you shoot, you can easily delete, review, and everything really quickly. In fact, I actually think this is more responsive because it doesn't do that retraction of lens thing that GFX system tend to do sometimes and makes it a little bit slow as I reviewed my GF80. In fact, let me show you the link here. I talk about the GF80 and the retraction of lens that slows the camera down. In terms of autofocus, this guy has no face detection. So imagine the GFX 50 and the GFX 52 versions is somewhere in between there. Not very fast, not very slow, but for medium format standard, pretty good. It can autofocus on anywhere on the screen, just touch and then just autofocus anywhere. The number of buttons are very little. Very little. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 buttons and 1 dial. But for the purpose of shooting, once you set up everything, it is very easy to use. This is designed for a waist level shooting. LCD flip up. It has dual cut slots here and then a battery. Charges with USB-C at the side. And it has one of the nicest LCD, brighter than anything here. If you can use your handphone, you can use this too. And that's really about it. I don't talk about technical specs. So as I say, this review will be a bit not the same as the rest because really, what is so good about a Hasselblad system? Why does it demand such a pricing? And that is what I'm going to share with you. Firstly, the output of the Hasselblad system. I feel that the file output of the Hasselblad system is different. It is more grey tonish, as I put it, but it's also more true to color. A little push in color will get you something very nice and realistic. Overall, I feel that the files from the Hasselblad system are just slightly easier to deal with than the GFX file. I mean slightly easier to deal with. I do not mean the latitude of the file, the dynamic range, because I find dynamic range wise, the GFX 100, GFX 50 is very similar. The GFX 100 may be slightly better. GFX 50, the same as the Hasselblad. But getting the color you want, the Hasselblad is easier. It just looks nicer. The skin tone and stuff, it just looks nicer. Just a bit of push. You can see some of the photos I shot. Even though I do about teal and orange type of feel, I feel that they are so easy to get there. The Hasselblad system is just easier to deal with. And also I find that the contrast and stuff is just nicer. So the fog output of the Hasselblad system is more pleasant than the GFX system. The very last and most important part. And why will you consider this over the GFX? I'm a GFX user. I use it for 5 years. Why will you consider Hasselblad over the GFX? And before I start, I will tell you that I am considering the Hasselblad. I am considering it. And the reason is very simple. The leaf shutter mechanism. Now, this is something I've been telling GFX Fujifilm sometime, that if they do make a leaf shutter camera, or should I say they do make a leaf shutter lens, I will actually consider. So what is a leaf shutter, you may ask me? Because I think a lot of people who don't use the Hasselblad or the Phase 1 system before will not understand what I'm talking about already. And let me illustrate you with my A1, because A1 has a close focal plane shutter. Traditionally, this is what you get, a focal plane shutter, a shutter that is on the camera itself. Focal plane shutter has a few advantages. Firstly, you can use any lens with the camera. Secondly, you can have a very high shutter speed. You can go to 1/8000. And third, it's easy to maintain. It's just one shutter on the camera itself. Unlike every single lens, if you do leaf shutter, every single lens have a shutter. As such, it is expensive on every single lens. You are putting the cost on every single lens rather than just on the body itself. And no, because the focal plane shutter is so heavily used, I think it's probably affordable because almost every camera out there has a focal plane shutter. Unless you are doing an all-in-one, then you have a leaf shutter itself. And when I say focal plane, I mean every other camera here. The X-T4, which is on loan to me, the GFX, which is mine, both of them also have focal plane shutters. So the question is, what is the disadvantage of a focal plane shutter? There is a concept of a flash sync on this camera itself. If you do not know what is a flash sync is the speed where the focal plane shutter can fully open, push a flash out, and fully close. Then you get a proper shot. Beyond that, you will need something called a high-speed sync to just get the same lighting effect at a cost of a lot of power and color accuracy, and you lose the advantage of using flash. And I will talk about it later when I talk about leaf shutter. So on the A1, you go to 1/4000. On the GFX, you go 1/125, very low flash sync. And on the X-T4, you go 1/200. So beyond that flash sync, you need to use high-speed sync. But below that flash sync, you can use your flash as per normal itself. So pretty much this is it, So a leaf shutter is a shutter that is built into the lens itself. And I'll say as every Hasselblad lens has a leaf shutter. A leaf shutter has a max sync of about 1/2000. And also have a max shutter of 1/2000. What does it mean? There's no concept of max flash sync on the leaf shutter itself. If the flash is fast enough, the cable is fast enough, you can have a flash that can sync at any speed on a leaf shutter camera. So the question is, what's the big deal of it when you can do high-speed sync, right? Case in point, let me show you this behind-the-scenes shot. This is shot with the GFX, and let me say that with that scene, I used an AD-1200 to go through a softbox reverse umbrella with diffuser, to be exact, at about 2 to 3 meters away, at half power for a GFX system to shoot at, I think, 1/800 of a shutter or 1000 shutter. I've forgotten the exact setting. But just a case in point, you need that much power at f5.6. Let me show you a shot with a Hasselblad now. This is a Hasselblad shot. And this is shot at 1/1250, a much higher shutter speed. And then it has an aperture of f4.5, lower aperture. But what am I trying to illustrate here is that notice the flash that is attached. This is an AD-300, which has 1/4 of a power, or 2 stops lesser than an AD-1200. Price 1/3 of the AD-1200 and weighs 1/4 of the weight of a 1200, or half the weight of a AD-600. So I'm now using a much smaller flash to achieve the same effect. But that's not only that. The AD-300 was using at 1/8 of a power, while my AD-1200 was at half power. Given that the AD-1200 is of course further away, I put that in compensation. A AD-300 with a Hasselblad camera has 3.5 times more power than a AD-1200, given a situation where the 80,200 needs to use high-speed sync, while the 8300 is using normal sync. So it means that using a Hasselblad camera, I can carry a flash that is smaller, lighter, and still use less power on the flash to achieve the same effect. And that is important. Because if you are a flash shooter, lugging two 80,200 out is no joke. Or lugging 80,200 out with an 8600 is also no joke. It's so heavy. But if you want that look, the flash in the sunlight look, you just have to bring those equipment out. Well, with a Hasselblad, you can do it with 8300s and probably speed lights and achieve the same effect, right? Now, remember I said that this guy is more expensive than the GFX? Technically, what you're going to do is move all your money from your camera to the flash. The 8600 costs twice the price of an 8300. The 80,200 costs 3 times the price of a 8300. So the 80,200 is 3 times the price of an 8300. So you're pretty much putting the money into the flash and adding a whole lot more weight in the system itself. And that is the first part. And the second part is also the quality of light. If you use a normal flash, you should know that if you do studio photography, you always notice that your studio shots are very crispy, even though you are using a 125 or 1/200, because you are actually freezing the motion with flash itself. The flash has a speed same as shutter, and unless you're using it at full power, most of the time the flash speed is over 1/1000 speed. And in fact, if you're using 1/8 of the power of 8300, that's about 1/2400 speed. So that's the same as shooting a shot with 1/2400 shutter speed. And it is a very crispy, sharp shot if you're doing that. But the thing is, if you're using high-speed sync, the flash is working more like a flashlight. It is actually bursting the light in a very short duration, like a flashlight itself. And that's how you actually achieve high-speed sync. So if you're shooting at 1/800 shutter, and you use high-speed sync, you're going to get a sharpness of 1/800. Now, that is still very sharp and more than sharp enough for most people. But if you want to get that very micro contrast, very crispy shot, you'll notice that studio shots are still crispier and more contrast, micro contrast. The lines are just more defined compared to a short shot at 1/800. And that's because there is this small little motion there because, we always say within tolerance. But when you shoot at very high speed, all this tolerance is no longer an issue and you get really sharp, proper lines or sharp, proper outlines of anything you want. So when you shoot with a GFX system and high-speed sync, you don't get the same crispiness, I feel, as shooting with a Hasselblad. I just feel that the shots that I shot with the Hasselblad felt very crispy, very sharp. It just feels different from shooting with a GFX system and high-speed sync. Just different. And I think this is pretty much where the quality lies. So, in the end of the day, if you are a flash user, be it for portraiture, still life, or whatever reason, and you're intending to also use the flash outdoor, the Hasselblad system is better. It is just a better system to use. And also with a flash sync that goes significantly higher in studio, you can light your studio a lot brighter to make the whole studio more pleasant place to work with. And yet use that high flash sync to kill away all the ambient lights. As such, it's easier to focus, easier to communicate, easier to talk, yet still get the same outcome as a GFX. Because the GFX is 1/125, which means when I do studio shoots, I have to shoot with very dim lighting. If not, the lighting will actually corrupt the shadows, make it not so dark, or make it off color. While with the Hasselblad, I won't have that issue at all. Every single drop of light on the shot itself will be derived from the flash, and not a single drop will be derived from environmental lights. And that, I think, makes a huge difference. All in all, if you are a flash photography user, I highly recommend you take a look at Hasselblad. Yes, it costs more, but you can save on the flash itself and achieve very similar effect or even better effect because you just can sync a lot quicker. Now, if you are a general medium format users, then I would say the Hasselblad and the GFX is on par. However, if you want a face detection system, of course, there's only the GFX 100. But if not, the Hasselblad is also worthy to look at. Just note there's no IBIS here. So there's no IBIS. You really must remember that. That said, if you need IBIS, the GFX 50 S2 and the GFX 100 is your only alternative. If you don't need IBIS, you do a lot of flash photography, or you shoot in very bright daylight that uses high shutter speed, I think you can really consider the X1D. or the 907X I have on my hand here. And in the last part, if you ask me, okay, so my recommendation is that if you're using flash, of course, really consider the Hasselblad. So if now you ask me, will I consider Hasselblad, considering that I already own the GFX 100? I would say, honestly, yes. I will actually consider the Hasselblad, but if I do get it, I will get it with very particular lenses, probably the 45 and the 90 or the 80 1.9. Just very particular lenses, 45 90, 45 80, or 45 with 120 or something, 120, probably one of those lenses there. Because I will just use it mainly for portraiture, and I will use it mainly for flash photography and nothing else. If I'm not doing flash photography, or I'm unsure that I'm using flash photography, I will bring the GFX out, the A1 out. But if I'm very sure that day I'm going to do flash photography, I'll bring the X1D out or the 907X out. Because the outcome of using flash with Hasselblad is so much more pleasant, so much lighter, and also, if you ask me, it can also be significantly nicer and easier to deal with. And that's about it for today. I really want to share you my experience using the Hasselblad system. As I said, I'm not going to go in depth into every single component because for the price of it, it just, if I was to go through technical review, it would just look bad, right? I mean, everything here can perform technically the same, but with the leaf shutter and Hasselblad's output, the raw file itself, I'll say a Hasselblad is truly a camera built for people with very particular usage, especially if you are a studio photographer, you are a outdoor flash photographer, you are a pre-wedding photographer. I think these are people that really can consider it. If you are events photographer, probably not. If you are landscape, there's alternatives. But if you use any form of flash in any environment, this camera here, the 907X or the X1D2, is truly something you should consider itself. And that's about it for today. Oh, by the way, some people did say in some other review I read, the battery life is poor. Nah, it's not that bad. One photo shoot used 25% of the battery, so it's quite on par with any other cameras here. So if you are just using for photo shoot, I think one battery will last you easily 2-3 hours. No issues. So overall, the Hasselblad system is a system I would recommend to anybody who uses flash. And even for myself, I will personally consider it. Just have to see whether I got the funds to get it or not because I just bought my Sony system. And that's about it for today. I hope you enjoyed this short little review come thoughts of the Hasselblad 907X together with the CFV50C2 and the 35-75. By the way, 35-75 is a very nice lens. It doesn't extend, but because of that, the lens looks humongous and weighs a lot. Very on par with 32-64, very sharp throughout. I didn't want to show you any of the shots here because I can show you some of the photos, but nothing special about it, right? The special thing is the leaf shutter inside. That's all. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.